Hey, what's up everyone? Lucas here. I'm back in another tutorial for Geopix 1.0, and in this tutorial, mixing things up a little bit, and we're going to do a more in-depth mapping tutorial on these panels you see here on my garage. So these are simple arrays, they're grids, and they're in a modular configuration. We have like a diamond strip, a spade, and then we have this larger center cluster. Then we have two more of the same thing over here. I've had this set up for a long time, and so I'm very familiar with it. But it's just complex enough to kind of show you some of the interesting workflows and processes you can use to construct a larger array, and to do so with a high degree of accuracy, so that you can have a pixel perfect symmetrical layout. And as you can see over here in the outliner, we have quite a few panels and fixtures. We have just one device. And we're currently using 7 outputs on a Pixelite. That's what's driving this situation. So anyways, we're going to pretty much recreate this from scratch. And without further ado, I guess let's just jump into it and get this going. So first thing I want to do is clear the scene. Once we do that, our scene is empty and our preview here goes dark. I have the Pixelite set to just reset to black. So I'm going to go actually pull up the Avitech assistant here and just show you what the settings look like in the device. So here we have the first one, which is .3. It's the only one we're going to be using for this tutorial. And if I open up the configuration for this and hop over here into advanced, you'll see that we have a bunch of random numbers entered for start universe and channel. This is actually derived from the automatic sequence, which is what I've got set up here. So if you're following along with the Pixelite, I highly recommend using this, leaving this on. It's going to simplify your life a lot, because when you duplicate fixtures in Geopix 1.0, there's an intelligent offset that creates new offsets based on what you've duplicated and the settings of that fixture, and so it kind of helps automate some of the data entry. But no worries if you haven't set things up that way, or if you can't, then I'll show you kind of how you can configure things as you go a little bit more manually. So anyways, this is checked on. I'm not going to set this up again because it's already been set. There's nothing else in here to really note. We just have the basic default settings for WS2812B, DHCP. So anyways, 10.10.10.3. So that's what we're going to start with. We're going to make a device, and we're going to type in that IP address here, 10.10.10.3. We've got the default port for ArtNet. This parameter called spillover, we're going to just ignore. It's actually obsolete as of beta build 6, but it's still visually in here, so just ignore that. We have protocols, ID. We're going to not set ID to anything fancy here because we just got one device in this tutorial, but if we had multiple devices, you'd want to coordinate this number so that you don't have overlapping IDs and that your fixtures match that ID, etc., etc. So, all right, we got this set up. Let's go ahead and turn it on. Nothing's going to happen because we got no pics to map. So we're just going to move this off to the side. It really doesn't matter where it is, just needs to be present in the scene. And we'll go ahead and get our first fixture going. So by default, fixture is empty. So let's go ahead and make some panels. Just light some stuff up and make sure we got data flowing to our device. So I'll go ahead and hop over here into hulls. And I'm going to go ahead and go into add mode. And I'm going to hold S on the keyboard, which enables snapping. And just so you can see it more clearly, I'll turn on grid snapping. And I'll just go ahead and click on this this snap point that's right here over my fixture. So once I've done that, we've got a single 0, which indicates that our hull point 0 is right on top of our icon, which is good. So I'll go ahead and select all, just to make sure we have all our hulls selected, which in this case is just one, and then we'll click generator from selection. This is going to create a generator right on top of everything else. And it's currently set up to take advantage of all of the hulls in our fixture, which in this case is just one, so that's fine. We'll change it from strip to grid, and right away we see some stuff lighten up, so that's good. These squares in real life are set up in a diamond configuration, so they're basically just rotated 45 degrees. So the first thing we want to do is rotate this and get it matching this. So I know this preview is going to be kind of hard to see, one panel, but I'm going to go and show you what's going on as best I can. So we've got this kind of circular gradient animation going, and I'm actually going to change this because this isn't very helpful, generally speaking, in figuring out if your panel is flipped or rotated. We kind of need something that's got direction. So I'm going to go over here to the I/O tab and select this default ramp. I'm just going to pick a different style here. So I'll go with vertical. And you can see this a little bit better now. We have this ramp going from the bottom left to the top right in the real world. So if you hop over here to the editor, we have this animation going from bottom to top. So this implies that we need to rotate this 45 degrees to the right so that the animation matches what the real world shows. So to do that, I'm just going to grab the fixture and I'll type in a number here for RZ, 45 degrees. And you would think that this would have things working correctly, but because of the way our scene's set up, we actually rotated this in the wrong direction. We now have this ramp in real life going from left to right, which actually doesn't match this, right? We have this going from bottom to top, so we actually need to rotate this in the other direction. So let's just type in -45. And let's see if things match. Yeah, so we got bottom to top, bottom to top, bottom to top. And if we set this to horizontal, left to right, and then in real life, it's a little bit blown out, but it's going from left to right, so we're good to go. So from here, obviously, the most obvious thing you could do is just, grab this fixture and duplicate it, and that's fine, and you can do that. However, you're going to have to spend some time aligning things, right, to get it to be nice and symmetrical. So one thing I could do, since I made this first panel on the origin, is I could zero out everything but Y, right, and just I could find the good number here that I like, a happy medium. Maybe 45 is pretty close. And then I could duplicate this again. And just line it up as close as possible. Maybe I want this to be 90. Do the math in my head. And so far, so good. But there's a better way to do this. And the reason why it's important to find a better way is as soon as we get over here to this next panel on the garage, we've got this non-linear setup. So if I needed to create this look, I would need to position this panel somewhere around there and this one somewhere over here. But obviously, things are kind of crazy in the viewport because now we're positioning things on X and Y, and we don't have a good way of measuring things to their proper location. Obviously this isn't matching what we have here, but you get the idea. We need a better system for aligning these panels. So that is a good opportunity to introduce geometry into our workflow. So let's wait for these LEDs to go dark. They are. Okay, so let's reset the rotation on this fixture. We just use the default settings in this generator, so let's take a look at those for a moment. We have X count, Y count, X pitch, Y pitch, and while these settings don't match the panel in the real world, these are going to be centimeters, right? I'm just going to leave these alone. It's fine for the sake of testing and kind of building something. The only scale that matters is relative scale. So for the sake of this video, we don't need to worry about scaling this in relation to a human being yet. So let's bring in a piece of geometry. So I'm going to go hit tab, or you can just click on the create tab down here and click on primitive. And right away we have a cube, which is way too big. So the reason that we're bringing geometry in is we want to replicate the frame of that panel in some way that's usable. So one thing about geometry is the points, let me turn off the grid snapping, the points when you hold S will actually turn into snap anchors. So this is most useful when you're transforming geometry. because you can snap things to various other orange dots in the scene. And we're going to leverage that in the construction of our pixel map. So instead of a cube, I'm actually going to choose a plane. And now we want to make this plane the size of our panel. So I could just hit R and I could scale this manually with my eye, but I want to be a little bit more precise because these panels are going to be edge to edge and they're going to be repeating and showing content that needs to be mapped as perfectly as it can. So this is actually pretty close. I just eyeballed this, but a better way to do this, in my case anyways, is to look at the generator settings and figure out what math we need to convey. So we have X count and X pitch, and since this is the same, we just need these two numbers. So 10 times 3.333 is going to give us 33.333, and what that means is 33.333 centimeters is our pitch for 10 LEDs. For an array, we actually want the actual width of this panel is the spacing of 9 of those, right? Because we're not using that 10th. So if you look at the gaps between LEDs, you have 9 of them. But if we use 10 and multiply it by this pitch, we actually get the width of the frame in this case, which is going to be +1, and you'll see why that works out that way mathematically here in a moment. So I'll grab this fixture, and by the way, this is a 1 meter primitive by default, so when you see scale X, Y, Z for 1, that's essentially normalized around 1 meter. So what we want to do is go ahead and move the decimal place and just type in 0.333. I'm going to go and put this into all the scale parameters just to kind of keep things nice and even. When we zoom in, you'll see that this panel is actually half a pitch away from the edge of the most outer edge or ring of pixels. And this is correct because if you multiply this spacing times 2, you get the spacing between pixels. So this gives us a perfect construction frame to snap things to. So we can leverage this quite easily by simply parenting the fixture to this geometry. And now when we move the geometry, we're moving this whole element around. But let's simplify things a little bit first. This generator is already done its purpose, and we're not going to need it again. And so to avoid having, way too many objects in the scene, let's just go ahead and delete that. And also, let's just go ahead and name a few things to get things a little bit more organized. So I'm going to name this 0_device, and I'm going to name this D for diamond, then _G for geometry. And I'm going to name this one D for diamond _F for fixture. And I'm going to go ahead and name this _0 because it's the first one. And then I'm going to name this one G _0. And this is good. So this is going to be our base object here. And to get this back in line with what we had before, we need to rotate this on Z by -45. And so this is going to give us our properly mapped panel. But now it actually has a piece of geometry behind it that allows us to construct the shapes that we have in our arrangement here much more quickly. So I'll show you that by just go ahead and setting up the rest of this panel. So I'll hit Control D, duplicate, I'll move it off to the side, and then I'll hold S, and I'll just drag from this dot down here to this dot, and put those two edge to edge. And that's pretty quick and easy, so we can just do that a couple more times. We can just build this entire array. And right away we have one part of our panels here mapped correctly. So if we just want to go ahead and run this through the test scenarios that we have, we can do a vertical. It's looking good. Do a horizontal. It's also looking good. Radial is pretty useful if you are trying to figure out if your panel's flipped on X or Y, because sometimes the ramps will not give you a very clear indication, but you can look at the rotation in this course, or in this case, it's going counterclockwise, and it's doing the same thing in real life. So that's all looking good. So this was quite easy, and one of the reasons why this was so easy is because when we duplicated these fixtures, the channel, universe, subnet, and net automatically updated to reflect kind of the next additional offset in panels. This is part of Geopix's built-in feature set. When you duplicate things, it automatically adjusts the offsets, and it tries to do so intelligently. Sometimes it's going to work out, but depending on how you're duplicating things and how you're working, you may need to go back in here and reconfigure these manually. So just keep that in mind. When you duplicate one thing at a time, you're going to get a nice consistent offset that works well with the automatic sequence channels in the Pixlite and other devices that do the same thing. So alright, so I'm going to go ahead and take these 4 pieces of geometry and I'm going to group them together. And I'm going to name this group, let's see, 1 underscore strip under D strip underscore L for left. So that's pretty much good to go. Let's go ahead and just translate this arbitrarily. We'll just scoot this over so we can use the center of our grid for the next object. And we'll actually duplicate this since we want to make another object that starts with the same single square panel. Let's just duplicate this this entire group, and let's zero it out. And we can actually just get rid of some stuff. So I'll get rid of these 3 pieces of geometry, and by deleting them, you're also going to delete the fixtures that are parented to them. And we can go ahead and unparent this from the group. So we can just kind of start fresh here. Cool. And let's go ahead and rename this for. Let's make sure this is zeroed out, so we're right in the center of the panel. Okay, so I want to go ahead and get the offset for this correct. As you can see, it's lighting up this top right panel over here, and that's because we deleted these panels, and when we duplicated them, it didn't know which order that they needed to be addressed in. So that's the issue with duplicating more than one panel, is you don't necessarily have that order taken into account. So we'll go ahead and hop back over to our AdvoTech assistant real quick, and we'll just pull open the Advanced tab here, and we'll take a look at output number 2, which is the output that's responsible for driving this second cluster, and that starts on universe 3, channel 181, so 3, 181. So all we need to do is type that into here, 3, 181, and if we give this a second to refresh, you'll see that that bottom panel is now reflecting the animation and mapping properly, so we're good to go there. What we can do now is just grab this piece of geometry, and we can start duplicating it and constructing our next cluster. And so I'm just laying these out in the order that they were wired in, and so I know that the bottom was the first panel, this was the second, this was the third, and this is the fourth. But in this case, it's actually pretty easy to just kind of see what the next one is. You duplicate it, and as soon as you duplicate it, something's going to light up, and that kind of indicates to you where the next panel is. But depending on what you're mapping, that might be more or less helpful than you might believe. So, all right, we've got this second cluster built here. We can just select these and group them together. I'm going to call this 2 underscore D spade L. And this is looking mapped correctly, so we don't need to test it any further. I'll just scoot this over on X, just get it out of the way. And the next thing we want to do is just kind of start working on this center cluster. So in order to make my life easier, I'm just going to grab the last item in this group over here. So it's this one right here. So I'm going to duplicate that, which is going to give me the next offset in the chain, which is correct, right? So I'm going to Shift P to unparent that from its group, and I'm going to zero this out and put it back in the center of our grid. And so as you can see, we have this first panel over here on the left, which this cable is plugging into here, then it's daisy chaining over, and then I think down and then up. So let's just verify this though. Let's click on the fixture. We have 5361 for our offsets. So if you go to the AdvoTech assistant and just give this a second to refresh for you. Output 3, 5, 361. So as you can see, we duplicate one object. That last one is going to give us the next offset, which in this case is the beginning of output 3. So that's one way to kind of simplify the situation a little bit. You can even just duplicate an object, figure out what the offsets are, and then remember those offsets, and then kind of enter your settings in from there if you want to recreate them another way. So in our case, we can just quickly duplicate these objects around, since we have a nice snapping structure to kind of work off of. So I'm going to take this guy here, I'm going to duplicate it, move it over. I'm going to snap this here. One thing I should note that we didn't note a second ago is that these panels actually don't look like they're mapped correctly, and that is because the rotation of these panels is different than these. And that's because of the way I constructed this thing. Essentially, I built this item right here, this spade, 4 times, and then I ended up rotating it differently to attach it to this middle object. Now that might have been simple in terms of fabrication and building it, but that actually made my life a little bit more complicated in terms of programming it. The same could be true, or could be said in reverse. If I wanted to make this simple to program, it would make it a little bit more complicated to build in real life, because you gotta take all of these different scenarios into account and always make sure your panels are rotated correctly. So depending on what you're doing, you may want to make your life easier in the software or in the hardware world. In this case, Geopix makes it a lot easier to quickly modify these things on the fly, so I prefer to simplify my life in the real world and then just rotate these in Geopix. So you grab these 2 panels and just start shift scrolling through this field and figure out where kind of a nice, pretty close rotation is. And I think I went in the wrong direction here. Yeah. So let's rotate it back past -45 and go to about here. And this is looking good. So what this tells me is that we just need to pick the next closest increment of 90 degrees, which is -135. And we're in the clear. So we can grab the last one that we had duplicated, and we can just duplicate that again. I can see that the bottom right panel lit up, so I'll go ahead and move this down here and snap it. And then I'll duplicate this again, and I'll just snap this to the top side. And now we've got this left portion of the center cluster built. So I'm not going to group this yet. I'm going to just move this over to the left. And you might have noticed here, I just marquee selected and I translated, and I'm getting this kind of double transform because I have both my groups or my geometry and the fixtures selected. So what I need to do is actually just select the topmost objects and translate those on X. And by the way, when I hit W on my keyboard, it enables the move, and I hit X after that, it basically constrains it to the X axis, so this allows me to quickly move things on X. So that's cool. I'm going to leave this right here, and I'm going to go ahead and make a new panel. I'm going to go grab this last one, number 11, duplicate that. And as you can see, we've got this bottom panel here lighting up, and that's correct. So I'll zero this out. And that's actually all I'm going to do for this output, because this output is only 100 pixels long. The pixelite is still obviously addressing 400, but just based on the way I built this, I just said, screw it, I'll have 300 null pixels, and we'll just move on to the next fixture after that. The problem that this gives us is that we can't easily use the duplicate function to get our next offset, because if we duplicate this, it's going to be addressing the null pixels that come after this panel. To kind of show you, I can just duplicate this. As you can see, nothing new has lit up, because if you imagine 3 more imaginary panels attached to this guy, they don't exist, they're not plugged in, so we don't see that effect here. So I'm going to delete that, and before we proceed, I'm going to fix the mapping on this panel. It's rotated differently again, but I think it's rotated like these in the beginning were rotated, so let's just type in -45 and see what happens. Yeah, so that's looking good. We can go ahead and snap this to the cluster, see if that's mapped correctly. It is, so that's good. So we can actually duplicate this, start on this next cluster over here. So I'll hit Control D. Let's go and zero this out again. And this time we're going to need to actually enter in our offsets manually because we have some universe samples that we're skipping. So I'll go back to my Advotech assistant and let's figure out what we need to pull from here. So we have output 1, output 2, 3, 4. So output 5, which is starting at 10 to 11. That's the information we need. So I'm going to grab the fixture and just type in 10 and 211. And we're good to go. We got this first panel over here on the right side of the center cluster lighting up. The rotation is going to be different yet again, and I think this one is 45. Yeah, so that's moving in the right direction. Good. And so from here, we just need to build the rest of this cluster. So we'll just hit Control D, do the same thing we've been doing. Snap these together. In the order that they're wired. So there we go. Now we want to bring this cluster over here next to this one, and we can actually do that by shift selecting these geometries, and we can still we can translate these as a group with a snap functionality. So if we select them and then shift snap this, S snap this guy to this one right here, you'll see that we brought this entire selected group. It's not actually grouped, but you know, it's a selection group over here to this panel right here. So this is looking good. We can actually select all of these items, and let's just go ahead and center these up on the group a little bit more, or on the grid. Maybe we want to figure out what our anchor point here is, right? And we've been using the bottom panel for all of these as an anchor point, so it just makes sense to keep that consistent and use this bottom point right here in the middle and just anchor this to the center of the grid. So let's move this up a little bit, and let's snap this. Well, we need to turn on grid snapping. We can snap this. Hard to see because the snap point is behind the pix, but if you just drag this and snap it right there, we have that now centered on our grid. And so from here, I'm actually going to group all of these because this is kind of a logical cluster. Even though we have 3 different pixelite outputs, this is something that will never be separated, right? So we always want to move these together as a unit. So I'll hit Control G on the keyboard, creates a group and parents those items to it, and I will call this 3 underscore center cluster. Just call it center. And that's all we have to do with that one. So from here, the hard work is done. We essentially need to duplicate these 2 objects, and we can do that quite easily. So let's just try and duplicate this spade, because that's the next one in our address sequence here. I'll hit Control D, and I'll go ahead and move this over on X. And well, the panels look like they're mapped correctly individually. The order does not seem correct. So to fix this, it's just easier to recreate this panel manually. So I'll delete these, and let's go ahead and figure out what our offset is for output 6. So output 6 is, if this is refreshed by now, you should be able to see it, 12,391. So let's just go ahead and enter that here. 12,391. And there we are. We're addressing that object. And we actually want to go ahead and rename this, I guess. Let's see, we got 3. I want to set this to 4. This would be on the right side. Okay, I hit F, by the way, to zoom to the object that's selected. Anyways, once we're back here, we have our geometry template selected. Let's just go ahead and duplicate this, move it up. You can turn off grid snapping. And we actually are doing this incorrectly. We need to snap this one down here. And we can duplicate it one more time and put it right there. So that is pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and rename some of these things. Some of the naming got offset. I'm just going to name this to 17. $18, $19, and $20. That's looking good. Let's grab this last one right here and let's just duplicate that like we did before. And let's go ahead and Shift P to unparent that from anything else, and let's just go ahead and zero it out in the grid, and then let's move it over. Actually, let's just go ahead and leave it centered for now. And we're going to use a different, a couple of these, so these little icons over here on the right, if you haven't figured it out by now, are for toggling visibility. So let's just go ahead and toggle off the visibility of our centerpiece just for a moment. It's also going to turn off its output. And so we're left with this one down here, 21. And so let's go ahead and finish constructing this real quick, and then we'll move it over, and then we'll turn things back on. So I'll hit Control D, and I'll translate that up. Hit Control D again. Snap this down, and then do this once more. And once we've done that, we can just grab these and group them together. Gonna grab this name right here, and we will call this 5 with an R. Let's just put this at, let's move it off to the side. Let's pick a whole number so we can actually make this symmetrical. So I'm using 400. Let's grab this one. Let's do the same thing, negative 400. Then let's grab the spade. Let's do negative 300, maybe negative 200, negative 250. We'll see here in a moment. And let's turn on our center cluster. I'm going to turn the visibility back on the group, and it's going to auto turn on everything below it. Great. So this actually looks good at 250. So let's grab the right spade and set this to 250 as well. And let's grab this one over here. It's already at 400, so we're good to go. There's a few other adjustments we want to make. Obviously, the alignment is top aligned, not bottom aligned. So to adjust that, we can do one of two things. Let's just grab the two outer ones, because those are the only two that aren't aligned. And let's just start typing in numbers here. Let's find a nice, happy, round number that we can use. Negative 75 feels about right. If I wanted to, I could measure this out and figure out exactly where these align. I could even make a piece of geometry. That would allow me to snap to it if I wanted to get things super precise. But for the sake of this tutorial, I think that's fine. This is looking pretty good. I found that when you have a gap in spacing between panels, you can have a lot more flexibility in terms of what looks good. And that's pretty much it. So at this point, let's just look through our outliner here. We've got a lot of objects, and at this point we should probably save, right? So we'll just go ahead and save with this button up here. I'm not going to save because I've already saved this project before. But this is essentially the end of the mapping process. Now there's a few more things I would personally do to this to make it kind of ready for use. Obviously there's many steps after this when it comes to setting up strobes and masks and different types of effects, and we're going to get all into that in different tutorials after this series. We'll be using the same setup, but for now, just to kind of tidy up this scene and kind of wrap it up, maybe we want to just go ahead and clean up this outliner. So one of the things that's taking up a lot of space and slowing down the system a little bit while we're in the editor is all of these pieces of geometry we use to construct our map. So we could leave these in here, and we could also just disable them. But for me personally, I actually want to just get rid of them. They've already served their purpose, just like the generators, and they're just kind of getting in the way. So easiest way to do this is to just delete them. But of course, if you delete them, the object that they are that's parented to them will also go as well, right? And we want to keep the fixtures. We want to get rid of the geometry. So the easiest way to do this is just shift select all of the fixtures that are in one group. So I just shift selected all of these here in this strip, and I'm going to shift select the group last, which makes it the target, and I'm just going to hit P on the keyboard, which is the same as clicking parent over here on the left. And what it does is it parents them to the last selected object. That's how the parenting function works in Geopix. And so these are no longer the parent of these objects, so we can now safely delete them, and our fixtures will stay under the group. So we've done that, and so we can pretty much just repeat the process now for everything. So I'm going to select these fixtures, shift select the group, hit P, and just grab these geometries and delete them. And we'll just do this to the rest. Just two more. And the last one. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. This is much cleaner, right? We can see what's going on a little bit easier. We don't need that geometry anymore. And so we're pretty much done. But to make this a truly modular, portable piece of Geopix code, something that we can open and import into our scenes later, we probably want to include the device into our device tree here. And so we've kind of ignored this for the most part, and that's for good reason. We haven't really needed to pay attention to it. But we want to package this up nice and tidy. So what we're going to do is we'll probably actually grab these groups. And this is my own personal workflow. You can obviously parent and group these things however you'd like, but as a 3D, some of you come from the 3D artist world, I like to keep my transforms and kind of hierarchies very clean. So as you can see, I'm putting a lot of attention towards that. So I'm going to basically okay, let's see here. Let's do these one by one. See where this is at. So negative 125, negative 175. There we go. I think that's what we want to do. And actually, I take that back. What we want to do is negative 125. All right, that's looking about right. And these can both be negative 200. And the reason I use whole numbers like this when at all possible is if I translate something away and I need to bring it back, I can just reference the other side, say, okay, that's negative 200, this one's 200. And it's just a simpler workflow in that sense. So I have this device, so I can just go and select these groups now and shift select the device and hit P. And I've parented these groups of fixtures to the device they belong to. So this is now a very modular, portable system. So now when I build a new scene in Geopix and I have a gig where these panels need to be on a stage, I can just import this specific file from disk. And not only will it bring in all of the mapping and all of the ArtNet addressing, it'll also bring in the pics themselves and the device that communicates to the Pixlite. So it's kind of a one-stop shop. So I can basically export this selection when I have just this top device selected. You don't have to have these selected. And I can name this as Stage diamonds. If I wanted to be really organized, I think what my workflow would be here is to use the nickname of the pixelite. I mean, in this case, it's got a lot of spaces and special characters, so I'd probably want to change the name to be a little bit less crazy. But essentially, I could call this 1 through 16 or 1_16, and I could name the exported file the same thing, so that essentially I have a pixelite for every section of potential stage lighting. And so this makes the setup very modular, because you can import all of these into your scene, or you can import one or some, and just kind of hit the ground running very, very quickly in the future. So that concludes this tutorial. We'll use this setup here soon in another tutorial that illustrates projectors and having some fun with the I/O tab. It'll be still kind of a intermediate course on the I/O and the projector stuff. Not meant to be a comprehensive one, but look forward to that tutorial and kind of keep an eye out for it. And I appreciate you watching, and if you have any questions, please drop them below or shoot me an email. Thanks a lot.